The U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, North Korea's wavering, and Gina Haspel as head of the CIA. I'm Donna Davis, and this is The Square Circle. Hello, and welcome to The Square Circle. I'm your host, Donna Davis. Joining us today are conservative activist Wes Fisher, political reporter James Rosen, and contract attorney Benita Talati. Welcome, everyone.
Good to be here.
The new U.S. Embassy opened in Jerusalem this week, fulfilling a promise from President Trump and a longtime dream of many in the U.S. and Israel. But the event coincided with violent protests in the Palestinian territories. James, do you think there was any way we were going to avoid this violence?
No, I don't. The violence was predictable, which doesn't mean it was unwarranted. I myself am Jewish, and I have somewhat mixed feelings about this. Jerusalem is the historical ancient capital of the Israeli people. It's been politically off limits for the United States to have its capital there because, of course, it's contested. It's a contested city. It's claimed by all three major religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. And that's been the status quo for a number of decades. And both Republican and Democratic presidents have refused to upset the apple cart. They kept the U.S. Capitol in Tel Aviv. The embassy, thank you, in Tel Aviv. President Trump, this is one of the promises. He hasn't followed through on many of his campaign promises, but this is one of the promises he made during the campaign, and he followed through on it. I think that it could have political significance in the United States, particularly in the 2020 elections, should President Trump run again if he makes it, or perhaps another Republican candidate, because the Republican Jews for a long time, for decades, voted overwhelmingly Democratic in presidential elections. It started creeping up with the election of Richard Nixon, who was an extremely strong supporter of Israel. It's been creeping up since. But I still think it's only, I could be wrong here, I think it's only 25-30%. And I could actually see this move alone by President Trump bringing more Jewish votes to the Republicans. And the last thing I'll say is, if we remember how close the last election was in a handful of states, that could make a difference in a state like Florida, which has a lot of Jews, and other states which have large Jewish populations. Wes,
what's your position on this?
Well, I learned something yesterday that I had no idea about, and I bet there's a lot of folks out there that didn't know that, and that was that in 1995, right after the whole Republican Revolution with Newt Gingrich coming in, they passed a bill called the Jerusalem Embassy or some Act or something along those lines, and it required that the U.S. Embassy be moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem within the next 2 years of that. And if you wanted to delay that, the president had to sign a waiver every 6 months. So Clinton, Bush, and Obama, every 6 months for their entire presidency, signed a waiver to delay that. So that was something that was very, very interesting to me, that it was already technically U.S. law that we were going to move our capital there, but it was
Embassy.
I'm doing the same thing.
Sorry. It's his fault.
No, I've done that before too. Our embassy there, but it was it just for so long was politically not feasible or not seen as feasible by the presidents. But that puts you in a situation where when you pass a law that leaves the executive up to his or her discretion to pass a waiver or continue or discontinue something, you definitely need to look at the ramifications of that, because that was something that it really blew my mind when I found that out, that this has been over 20 years now since this law was passed.
Well, the United States has been friends with Israel for many decades, but I was very surprised that we went forward with this. Benita, what was your thinking when this happened?
Well, you know, it was a law, as you said, that this was supposed to be done. So on the one hand, finally someone decided to, enforce this law and get this done. On the other hand, to your point, James, I see another political ramification. This could actually bring Muslims who have been voting Democrat, or rather, well, let me try this again. There have been a lot of Muslims who obviously vote Democrat, but there's also been Muslims who vote Republican. Right. And it could very possibly be that it could actually encourage all those Muslims, or many of the Muslims who voted for Trump, to swing back over to the Democrat side as a result of this. So really, especially looking into November, in the midterms, and now in the next couple of months in the primaries, we could see a shift in a different way as well.
That's an excellent point, but I think without having researched the stats, my guess would be that particularly in several of the high electoral college states like Florida, a couple other states, that Jews outnumber Muslims. I would guess that. I don't know that, and I would think they would outnumber them by a significant amount.
Very interesting. Well, this is certainly a charged issue. I think no one thinks that this is a non-issue. Wes, when you were talking about this 1995 law, where was it that you came across it? It sounded like you just found out about it.
I just saw it in the news, and I don't remember where, but it caused me to just go down a Wikipedia rabbit hole of reading about kind of some of our relationships with Israel, and we do have a long-standing and very valuable partnership with them. They're one of our strongest allies. I think they were our first ever free trade agreement that we had. So I think it's definitely a relationship that our current president wants to strengthen. And frankly, it's been fairly bipartisan. Most presidents have been pro-Israel to varying degrees. We've yet to have an anti-Israel president, really.
I think that's accurate. Benita, do you think that we should have just continued to sign the waivers, or do you think that this was a campaign promise that the president was correct in actually following through on?
You know, he's made so many promises, and he's trying to deliver on at least some of them. So on the one hand, good on him to finally deliver on a promise. On the other hand, there's also the fact that there has to be a resolution in some way or another. We can't keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, just keep signing waiver, signing waiver, signing waiver. So on the one hand, that's actually kind of a good thing. And actually also Guatemala apparently is also considering a move. So it might start a trend.
I'd like to remind our viewers that you can submit your questions to our guests through our website, www.publicsquare.net, or via Facebook or Twitter. And we'll answer as many as we can live on air toward the end of the show. Also this week, North Korea took a different tone on the upcoming summit with President Trump. Here's the story from CBS News.
Just 5 days ago, President Trump soaked up praise at a rally in Indiana, confident his summit with Kim Jong-un was right on track. Now, North Korea is threatening to back out over combined South Korean and U.S. military drills, and warned the United States will also have to undertake careful deliberations about the fate of the planned North Korea-U.S. summit in light of this provocative military ruckus.
Wes, I was very surprised to hear that we were going ahead with a summit. I felt that it was rewarding North Korea a little too solidly. How do you feel about how things are turning out?
I think I feel the same way. I think I'm very surprised by really what's happened in the last few weeks. I'm not sure how sincere a lot of the North Korean leaders' attempts to seem like a really peaceful and someone that's searching to come to an agreement about this whole situation. I really don't think you can trust North Korea, and it was surprising to me when we decided on a summit in the first place. So to that end, I wouldn't be surprised at all if this summit doesn't go through. In fact, I think I would be almost more surprised if it does end up happening at this point. And I'm not sure if it's the wisest thing for it to happen in the first place.
Why do you say that?
Well, I'm not sure how much it could be done. I think that North Korea is always going to insist that they keep their nuclear weapons program. And that's, I think, something that the United States should hold the line on and try to make sure that, you know, not only are they disassembling their nuclear weapons program, but also that in the broad, 10, 20, 50, 100-year picture of North Korea, that they're opening up their country for free trade, that they're helping the starving people and the people that are in forced labor camps and all these terrible things that are happening there in North Korea, and that they have democratically elected leaders in their country. That should be the end goal. If we're going to be involved with North Korea at all, then we might as well at least encourage that to happen on the world stage. Now, you can disagree to what extent you want to be involved. There's those that want, heavy-handed nation building and government interference, U.S. government interference in all these other countries. But I think a country like North Korea that poses a significant threat to America and stated that they pose a significant threat to America is something that you have to be proactive about.
Benita, I think releasing the hostages was similar, just the first step towards warranting their participation in the summit with us. Do you think that they are ready and have brought to the table enough to be able to come to this summit with us?
It was the first step in the right direction, but denuclearization really is necessary and key. On the one hand, I can see where North Korea would be a little concerned that U.S. and South Korea are still engaging in joint exercises. They might be feeling like, well, wait a minute here. We're going to start disarming. Why are you still doing these exercises? So that's one thing. The other thing is, I don't think anyone should be surprised at all that this summit might be falling apart. It was exciting to see both North Korea and South Korea engage together. It was wonderful to see them crossing over to each other's countries, et cetera. But this is one of those moments where, we thought it would be a good thing, and it could still actually be a good thing, but we still need to see more to be done on both sides, I think. And by both sides, I mean both North Korea and the United States. I think that it's possible that North Korea wasn't aware that both South Korea and the United States were going to continue their joint exercise. They might have been under the impression that they weren't going to.
James, what's your position on this?
Well, I think that this already has been a bigger coup, feather in the cap for North Korea than for the United States. Just the fact that on TV stations around the world, that you've got the President of the United States engaging pretty much directly with the President of North Korea elevates North Korea's standing, makes them look important. They very much want that. In terms of denuclearization and other issues, one of the things I would remind everyone of is when President Gorbachev and President Reagan had their historic summit in the 1980s. The United States had been pushing the Soviet Union on, and of course it was a much more threatening enemy to us than North Korea would ever be. The United States had been pushing human rights and lots of other issues for decades. But President Reagan went to Moscow. I think Reagan went to Moscow first, and the two men met, and the focus was on reducing the number of nuclear arms. It was a narrow focus, and it was achieved, and it was considered a breakthrough. So I think what the point I'm trying to make is that even if they just start with getting some sort of commitment from North Korea to slow down the development of their nuclear program or to do something along those lines, that would be a major breakthrough, and it could lead to other changes.
Do you think that North Korea actually has earned their way to a summit with the United States?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think a lot of people have noticed that it's quite strange for any president who is not named Donald Trump to pull out of a nuclear deal, a verified nuclear deal with Iran, and be pushing a nuclear deal with North Korea.
And finally, President Trump's nominee to head the CIA, Gina Haspel, faced tough questioning from a Senate committee, but she still won confirmation by the full Senate today. Benita, what are your thoughts on our new head of the CIA?
Well, there's a lot of different things. On the one hand, she's the first female CIA director ever, and that's actually kind of exciting. On the other hand, though, there is the issue of her history with torture. She did supervise the torture in Thailand. She has not come out directly, forcefully saying that it's immoral, and those are some serious concerns.
Now, do you think that her being a female matters one way or the other in terms of what you just said? If a man had been involved with those kinds of things, Do you think he would have handled it any differently than she had?
I don't think gender plays a role in that sense, but the point I'm making is that there's always complaints that there aren't enough women in government, right? Well, here's an example of a woman who is qualified based on her experience as, deputy director, acting director, her long history in the intelligence community, et cetera. But it's just the fact that she has endorsed torture in the past. She did walk it back, of course, but not strongly enough.
Wes, do you think that there was anyone in the intelligence community who has not, in some way, shape, or form, endorsed torture?
Oh, I'm sure there are. I'm not as intimately familiar with that community, but I'm sure there are. I'm sure there's plenty that are, and this is the first that I can remember of a very high-profile, controversial nominee to lead the CIA, at least in the last 6 or 7 years I've paid attention to these kind of assignments and things like that. One thing I would add is it seemed like she walked back a fair bit those things, and then also I saw that the final vote was 54-45 with John McCain, of course, being in Arizona, and that was with a few kind of your more libertarian Republicans. I think Rand Paul and maybe one other dissented from that vote and voted against her, and then you had 3 or 4 moderate Democrats join her, including Mark Warner, who is from Virginia and is the ranking member of that intelligence committee. So once I saw that, that was very surprising for me, that the ranking member of the intelligence committee, and also a fairly liberal and fairly popular senator, decided to break with most of his party to support her.
Do you have any guesses as to why he would do that?
I couldn't tell you. My only guess would be that because he's the ranking member of that intelligence committee, he probably knows a lot. That I know they're in tune to a lot of all sorts of confidential classified information about intelligence, so he may be able to know more and make a decision based off of things that the public doesn't know.
James, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, look, she can make the same argument, the Eichmann and Goebbels argument during the Nuremberg trials, that they were just following orders. And she was just following orders. The policy was set perhaps by W. Bush. We don't know if he really made that policy. It was certainly set by Vice President Cheney. And so she was following a policy of her superiors. On the other hand, choosing her to head an agency so important like the CIA reverses, I think, an important process that's been going on since that period, which is the United States has been turning away from that kind of dark past and has explicitly denounced it. And so this kind of changes that momentum, and I think it sends a worrisome signal to would-be terrorists and to other folks, and it allows them to point to. In some ways, it's a propaganda victory because it allows the people in countries that torture terrorists to say, well, gosh, the head of the American CIA was not only in favor of torture, she was a hands-on torturer. So I don't think that's good.
Were there other names that were being bandied about that you thought might have been a better choice?
Not in any serious way. I mean, I could offer a couple, but I think she had the inside track for quite a while.
Do you think that she made it into the role too easily?
I was surprised that there wasn't more debate. But even back after 9/11, Senator Lindsey Graham and John McCain and a couple others were pretty lonely voices in the Senate, at least, in speaking out forcefully against torture, and there are members of Congress to this day who refuse to even call what they called enhanced interrogation techniques, who refuse to even call that torture. So, there was never a groundswell in Congress against those techniques, and I think that's harsh techniques, and I think that's one reason why she was confirmed.
Do you think that there were other issues discussed that were heavy enough of a weight against this history of torture to support her, or do you think there was really nothing that could have supported her being nominated? In terms of other issues that could have been brought to the fore that would support her being nominated?
The whole thing, it was, her nomination was dominated by this question of torture. And I will say this, it's easy to forget that we were in a very different era now. We thought, we still believe, but we thought that our homeland was going to get attacked again by major terrorist attacks. We passed several really kind of draconian laws, the Patriot Act, and other laws in response to 9/11. We were in a different time then, so it's kind of hard to look back and use today's criteria on what was going on then. Having said that, the torture at Abu Ghraib and a number of other places where alleged terrorists were out it was pretty bad.
Benita, do you think that any other issues should have been more forcefully discussed rather than just this question, or do you think that the terrorism issue was the central issue?
You know, I think the terrorism issue was the central issue. And I will say one thing about Gina Haspel. She actually, well before 9/11, actually recognized that al-Qaeda was, in fact, a threat and raised that issue.
All right, let's take some questions from our viewers. Sean Day has a question for our guests. Before this week, did anyone really believe that the U.S. is truly an honest broker between Israel and the Palestinians? James, I've got to throw this one to you.
That's a very complex question. You know, the answer is yes and no. The United States, going back to Henry Kissinger, Richard Nixon, a number of administrations, has tried to be an honest broker. But it's hard to be an honest broker and to sell the idea that you're an honest broker when you give something like $5 billion a year to Israel. You're Israel's strongest ally. The Israeli leaders and the U.S. leaders talk frequently. So I think the United States tried hard to be an honest broker, but I don't think they ever really could be a completely honest broker. And I think a lot of folks, especially Arabs and Palestinians, didn't really believe they were an honest broker.
Wes, I would imagine it's pretty hard to be an honest broker when you're playing politics. What are your thoughts in terms of that?
Absolutely. I think I agree with a lot of what James said. That, we are a staunch ally of Israel, and I support Israel, and I think that that's great. In terms of being an honest broker, I'm not sure to what extent the U.S. has ever been committed to doing that, rather than, my opinion would be that we should support Israel.
Benita, anything your way?
Well, on the one hand, we are clearly a staunch ally of Israel. On the other hand, this is really none of our business, and really our country needs to stay out of it.
Those are strong words. Christy Sparks wants to know, what are some demands that you expect Kim Jong-un will make of the U.S. next month? Wes?
Oh, well, I think he's going to definitely stress, like we talked about, that the U.S. stop doing these joint exercises with South Korea, and then also insist on keeping in some way, shape, or form their nuclear program. And those seem to be the two big ones. Other than that, I'm not sure, but I imagine there may be some things that come out of left field, as there always can be.
Benita?
I would say adding to that would be lifting all the economic sanctions.
How about you, James?
I agree on the economic sanctions. Let's remember that when the first time President George W. Bush met with Vladimir Putin, he came back and said he had looked into his soul and he was a good man, something to that effect. And I think President Trump is even more open to that kind of superficial impression. You could easily see him, I'm not sure the summit's going to take place, but you could easily see him having a nice long dinner with Kim Jong-un and the Korean leader acting like a normal human being, and them having some laughs, and President Trump coming out and saying, I don't think this guy's that bad. He's, as far as dictators go, there's a lot worse than him. You could see that happening.
And our third question comes out of left field from Lance Norris. Okay, Benita, this is very important. Yanny or Laurel?
Oh my goodness. I cannot believe that the news cycle has been dominated by Yanny versus Laurel. For me, it was Yanny. I tried it, and it was just Yanny each time.
Yanny for me too. What about you, Wes?
I could do both based on how close I held my phone to my head.
This This issue is so hysterical. James, did you listen to it?
I did not.
Oh.
I did not.
Okay, 2 demerits for James.
Okay, yes.
All right. Let's start with, now it's time for the most underreported story of the week. Who'd like to start?
I can go first. This involves some numbers, so I've got a little cheat sheet here. But last year was the first year in the United States in 30 years that the birth rate was lower than the what's called the death rate, and that had not happened since 1978. And just to compare numbers, there were last year 3.85 million births in the United States. In 2007, I'm sorry, just 10 years ago, there were 4.3 million. So you had a drop off of about 500,000. That's a significant number. And for the first time in maybe ever, but there are not enough Americans being born to uphold what's called the replacement rate. In other words, there are not as many Americans dying each year, being born each year, as are dying. Russia has been experiencing that for many years, and that's why their population is declining. This is new to us. Finally, the Census Bureau has reported that the only way the United States population will continue to grow is through immigrants. And I find that kind of ironic given the fact that we have a president who's trying to keep a bunch of immigrants out of the country. So, does he want the population to shrink?
Those are good points, and it sounds like the ramifications could be dire. Wes, what do you say is the most underreported story of the week?
Well, I've got something a little interesting, maybe not so interesting, from the exciting world of internet sales taxes. And the Supreme Court has a case under consideration right now that's already been argued called South Dakota versus Wayfair. Wayfair, of course, is the online furniture store. And they're suing, South Dakota is suing to try to overturn a previous Supreme Court decision that says states cannot impose sales taxes on sellers that are located outside of their states but sell to somebody inside their state. Now, I think that you should not be able to tax outside your state's borders. One big thing that's fueled this, if you're an Amazon shopper, you've probably noticed that now you're being charged sales tax on Amazon items. That's because Amazon, the test is whether you have a physical presence in that state. So Amazon, because they bought Whole Foods, has a physical presence in all 50 states. Now they've got delivery stuff. So now they have to charge a sales tax on all this. So they were one of the biggest allies for preventing this kind of flip on state sales taxation. And they kind of changed their whole business model, and that changed their stance on it. So now they want to level the playing field so all online retailers have to charge a sales tax in each state that they sell to. I think that would be a nightmare for a small business owner. And I hope that the court decides to uphold the current decision.
That'll be very interesting to see how that falls out. But Amazon being such a big player and them having to pay to ask for taxes to be paid, it doesn't surprise me that they'd want the level playing field. Benita, what's your most underreported story of the week?
Well, and this probably isn't going to surprise very many people. As we all know, the news cycle has been dominated by so many stories of white people calling out cops on incidents involving African Americans. The most underreported incident has been the one that took place in Miami regarding the Cheesecake Factory employees who harassed the African American guest who just happened to be wearing a red MAGA hat. You didn't hear it on CNN. They have been all over Philadelphia and Starbucks. They've been all over Yale and all those types of incidents, but you didn't hear one word about it from CNN regarding Cheesecake Factory.
All righty. Well, that's all we have for this week. I'm Donna Davis. Thanks for watching The Square Circle. We'll see you next week.